Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. And it's a pleasure to see everybody here in the audience. I notice a lot of scouts here. Scouter Dave, do you want to say hello?
Hello. You asked. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do have some scouts and some leaders with us. We have Troop Scouter Christopher Warren, and we have Scouter Sarah. Some of us see you during your daytime job, and I'm sorry, I don't know. Scouter Catherine. Well, welcome, and more importantly, welcome Scouts. Thanks for coming to your town hall. It's great to see you here. I understand you've got an action-packed evening tonight as you go through some wayfinding exercises and learn about governance and different other things. And you're going to be with us for 20 minutes or half hour or so? Just want to say thank you very much. 4th Trafalgar is right in Ward 3, and having been past Troop Scouter and going through the whole program for decades, I want to welcome you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Scouter Dave, otherwise known as Town and Regional Councillor Dave Giddings. Council, the next matter is declarations of pecuniary interest, and the chair recognizes Councillor O'Meara.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. I wish to declare a pecuniary interest on item number 1, which is the public meeting report zoning bylaw amendment for 240 Highland Avenue PetSmart. Leyland, sorry, PetSmart. And I'm declaring a pecuniary interest in that my spouse works down the road for a veterinarian hospital that would be offering competing services to this item. So I will be not partaking in that discussion.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Sandier.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. It's not a declaration of pecuniary interest, but just a matter of order generally. I have a family matter brewing right now that I may need to leave early for. Just wanted to put that on Council's radar. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Council, we need a mover and seconder to resolve into Committee of the Whole. Councillor Grant and Councillor Lischina, all in favor? Opposed, if any? We are resolved into Committee of the Whole. And we have no consent items of public nature, but you do have a confidential consent item. And the recommendation is that the confidential report from the legal department be received, and council's desirous of noting for legal's consideration that we think it might be Ward 7 rather than Ward 4 on the header. It's a minor thing and the clerk can correct it. Council, do you want to go into camera to consider this, or is it clear enough that you can just receive the report? Councillor O'Meara. Councillor O'Meara moves the recommendation to receive. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you, Council. Now, the next item is the public hearing, item number 1. This is the public meeting report, the zoning bylaw amendment for 240 Leland Avenue, and this is the PetSmart item. We have a presentation from Kate Coburn, the planner, or Heinz Hecht. It looks like it's Kate Coburn. And we have at least one registered delegation. And Ms. Coburn, we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Mary Burton, members of council. The presentation I have for you this evening is for the public meeting on a zoning bylaw amendment application that has been submitted at 240 Leland Avenue as it relates to the proposed PetSmart. The site, as we are probably most familiar, is located at Oakville Place. This is an area that's bound by Leland Avenue, Trafalgar Road, and North Service Road. Oh, there we go. There is open space to the north of the property on the north side of Leland Road, if I can use my pointer here. And beyond that is a mixture of medium and high-density residential uses. There is low-density residential uses to the west, QEW to the south, and a mixture of commercial employment uses to the east. On the eastern side of the building, closest to Trafalgar Road, this is where once was occupied the Sears retail establishment over 2 floors of the existing Oakville Place. and the landowners have been working to find new tenants for the vacant space. They have submitted the application for zoning bylaw amendment to permit the retail store known as PetSmart for additional uses. Currently, PetSmart operates retail locations, which includes retail sales and pet grooming. The nature of the application, these retail sales and pet grooming is permitted as of right under the current zoning, I should add. The applicant is seeking permission to expand the range of accessory uses that would include puppy training, animal daycare, which would occur during business hours, and animal boarding or overnight care, which would be a 24-hour operation, with indoor amenity space only, no outdoor space. These uses are currently captured under the boarding kennel definition within the town zoning bylaw 2014-14, and are only permitted currently in the Greenbelt and Parkway Belt zones within the town. The property is currently designated as core commercial within the Livable Oakville official plan and is within the special policy area known as Trafalgar Road Corridor. It is also within the region of Halton's employment overlay. The property is zoned core commercial with a special provision that specifically deals with the landscaping and parking requirements for the site. The applicant's proposal would be to amend the existing special provision and add the additional uses I've noted. Matters for consideration for this evening would be that there is a town licensing bylaw, 2015-075, which requires that establishments that are providing the overnight boarding of animals obtain a license. The criteria for obtaining a license includes providing an outdoor amenity area and does prescribe specific intervals, timing intervals for when the dogs are required to be outside. There is no formal process for amending the licensing bylaw to permit a modification of any of those criteria. The site is within the region's employment overlay, as I mentioned, and in terms of potential impacts on adjacent existing or planned land uses for the site, the town has identified the property in the Trafalgar Road Corridor planning study as having opportunities for additional intensification on the site. In terms of public comments, we did receive one letter which highlighted a concern with respect to ensuring that outdoor green space be available to the dogs that are being boarded. So to recap, in my recommendation to you this evening, Council, that the meeting, public meeting report be received, and that comments from the public with respect to this proposal be received, and that staff consider any additional comments that you might have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
You've got at least one. Councillor Grant.
Just thank you very much for the report. Touch of confusion, you mentioned at one point there's no outside space, but then we do refer to outside space quite frequently. Is there not outside space?
So there is no, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, there is no outside space proposed. The outside space is a requirement under the licensing bylaw.
Okay. And on page 17 of the report, you mentioned that there is an outside exercise facility. Basically, it mentions that the dogs will be securely enclosed but mitigate noise. What are we doing about mitigating noise from animals specifically? Or we might ask the applicant later.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, through you to the councillor, could you rephrase the question? On which page would you refer to?
17 of your report, it mentions that basically I've got securely enclosed and to mitigate noise. Issues under review to be considered. The main concern is you're looking for the answers that Oakville Place is kind of an echo chamber for a lot of people who live up on the hill, and also for people who live on Robarts and nearby. So anytime there's any kind of noise associated with Oakville Place, the whole community gets up in arms. And I'm concerned that if we're not properly mitigating noise or assuring people that noise will be mitigated, it's not going to be helpful to the community as a whole.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I understand the section that you're referencing. It's at the bottom of page 17 in the italics portion. This is an excerpt specifically from the licensing bylaw, which is what requires the outdoor amenity space for the overnight care of the animals. So should, at the time that a recommendation for a decision on this matter comes forward to this council, whether or not outdoor space is provided, they also would have to comply with the licensing bylaw and meeting these objectives. So we're here today to hear feedback. and answer some of those additional questions that might be better answered by the applicant.
I thought as much, but thank
Okay.
you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the question about overnight boarding, is there a maximum number of days or nights? I mean, can you have an animal there for 2 weeks who doesn't see daylight?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, my understanding is that the licensing bylaw, which is going to regulate the duration, doesn't prescribe for a particular time frame in which an animal could be boarded. It just prescribes that outdoor space be provided, and that within any given day of stay, that the dogs be allowed outside. I believe it's a 12-hour interval.
So the applicant is asking that there's, or saying that there is no outdoor amenity space in this application.
That's correct.
So given what the bylaw says, we could technically have a dog in there for 2 weeks not seeing daylight.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, that's my understanding, and perhaps they can provide some clarity in their
That'd be great.
presentation.
Thank you.
Councillor Elgar.
Thank you for the presentation. Just trying to make sure I understand correctly what you are saying. In fact, that I've had people concerned from Ward 5, an individual emailed me, and extremely upset there could be dogs barking outside. And I guess it's going up the hill. You're saying we cannot control that? We have no say in that whatsoever, whether a dog is boarded outside or inside?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, the nature of the application as it was submitted is that the applicant is proposing to have the overnight care of animals maintained inside the building. They have amenity spaces that they are proposing inside the building. They're not proposing outdoor space. There is a conflict with the licensing bylaw, which states that if this use were to be permitted at this location, outdoor amenity space would be a requirement of obtaining a license to allow the overnight care of animals.
How do we get around that problem then? If the owner saying to make the residents happy, he's not going to, and we at the town right now are saying, no, you have to, how do we resolve that issue?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The issue would need to be resolved when we bring back a recommendation report. So for example, if staff were recommending approval of the application, they would have to deal with a licensing component at the same time. So some type of amendment process through that would be dealt with at the same time as the recommendation report.
Good answer. Thanks very much.
Councillor Knoll.
Councillor Elgar, I answered my question. I'm very confused about the chicken or egg issue here in terms of the, if we approve the planning application, how do we get around the licensing application and vice versa? So I'm really anxious to hear a response to that. That's going to be a big problem.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Can staff clarify a couple of things? First of all, on page 17, there's a diagram showing the proposed floor plan, and the writing is so small it's really hard to sort of understand what exactly is proposed to go where. Is there an open space within that that's meant to be a dog run?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, again, there is no outdoor space proposed with this application. The figure 2 that you're looking at on page 17, the area highlighted in red, that would be the most right portion of the floor plan. That is the area that is specifically designated for the overnight and daycare portion for both dogs and cats. Within this area, there are 2 rather large rooms that are very open concept play areas or activity areas that the dogs that are, when they're not in their designated kennel area, would be allowed to have exercise in these particular areas.
So that's meant to be the indoor run areas?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. The second is, the application is to allow the use, but it doesn't necessarily restrain them to having to use this particular floor plan. At a later date, they could modify how they run themselves or operate. Is that the case? Could they, for example, modify one of the parking lots to allow for an outdoor run for animals? Could they, for example, use a rooftop amenity area as a run, for example? I mean, there are another way that they could try and get around having an outdoor space. So are these things that they could, at a later date, come forward with in order to comply with the licensing requirement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I believe that the approach that we might be looking at going forward in any kind of recommendation would be to identify if an outdoor space were to be provided, and if so, what would be its size and general location built into the parameters of the zoning bylaw, so that it was very specific. If this were to move forward as submitted, for example, without the outdoor space, that also potentially would be prescribed. So any additional floor area, whether outdoor space or otherwise, be provided to accommodate for this particular use would need some sort of relief from that amending bylaw, whether it be a variance or coming back to this committee as a rezoning application.
Okay, so one way or the other, it would have to be a site-specific designation of some sort.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think that's helpful and it answers my question.
Councillor Santu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a general question, just to kind of help me out here. So we're looking at the entire diagram of the entire floor plan on page 17. I'm seeing on the left-hand side where it says existing corridor, that's out into the mall, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I'll probably defer this a little bit to the applicant, but my understanding is that there is existing maintenance corridors that were between some of the units within the mall. And I believe that these corridors are, these are the contained like waste and operation type corridors that are the back of house portions of the mall. There is a direct access into the mall, which is more denoted on the very bottom left. There's a black arrow that kind of points to it in front of where the corridor entrance is. But again, I think I'd defer that to the applicant to provide further expansion on how this floor plan works.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a general comment. Being a pet person myself, but also as somebody who has relative levels of allergens in our home, I'm concerned about having an overnight pet daycare and overnight stay area where patrons of the mall would be coming in on a regular basis and potentially be subject to high level of allergens. Just a concern that I wanted to mention, obviously not something for staff to take away. So thank you very much.
Councillor Chisholm.
Quick question. If recommendation comes down, there's no overnight, does that then also is a trickle-down effect that there's no outdoor facility?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, yes.
Thank you.
If they choose no overnight, then no outdoor stay. The amendment would still be required, if I can clarify, to allow for the training and the daycare portion, which would be during business hours.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm curious, have you vetted this through you? Have we vetted this through the bylaw department to get their take on the matter, particularly as it pertains to the lack of outdoor activity?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, we have been working very closely with Jim Barry and his group to understand the nature of the licensing bylaw, how it affects this particular application, and those conversations are still ongoing.
I'm curious if they've actually reviewed the Ontario for the Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, Regulation 6009, which actually prescribes conditions upon which animals can be kept. Because as I'm reading it, and I may be wrong, maybe the experts from PetSmart can educate me, but I'm reading that this probably wouldn't comply with that legislation. But I'm curious if there was any comment, was there any comment to the effect that they've reviewed the provincial legislation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, through the licensing group that we've been working with, it's been brought to our attention, the task force that council had a few years back in providing for certain regulations with respect to dogs and why it was introduced to the licensing bylaw. So again, we continue to have those conversations, and that's definitely something we will take back this evening in reviewing the matters to be considered for our recommendation.
Okay. Perhaps the planning director could capture that to review the requirements under Regulation 6009, standards of care and administration standards under the OSPCA Act.
Madam Clerk, I think we're ready for delegation.
Our first delegation and only listed delegation speaking to this item is Oz Kamal.
Welcome, Mr. Kamal. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Burton, members of council. My name is Oz Kamal. I'm with MHBC Planning, and I'm here accompanied today by, with representatives from PetSmart, Alan Blundell and Rob Smith. Collectively, we're here to talk about the proposed pet hotel at 240 Leland Drive. As noted by staff, the intent is that PetSmart proposes to take over a part of the formerly existing Sears department store and which is intended to be located at the northeast portion of the existing site, as seen on the attached sketch. The site-specific bylaw amendment would allow for temporary overnight accommodation of pets as an accessory use to a retail store. Just some general planning context, looking at it from a planning perspective at the provincial level, the growth plan wishes to support achievements of complete communities and that support people's daily needs. The pet hotel would contribute to a complete community as it would provide a service not currently offered for the public, and it utilizes existing infrastructure in a central location. The Town of Halton official plan designates the area as urban area. The Town of Oakville also identifies it as a major commercial area and zones it core commercial. These are places that provide services for the broader community and region. Looking at OPA 15, the town has identified the site as being in the future Trafalgar Road corridor, which requires additional study. The zoning bylaw allows for a range of commercial uses. It does already contemplate overnight accommodation of pets through a veterinary clinic, which is a permitted use, and it also allows for the pet care establishment. In terms of the actual, the floor plan, the proposed pet hotel portion of the site is 3,073 square feet. The intent is that it could accommodate up to it'll have up to 73 dog rooms, 8 kitty cottages, 2 playrooms, with space up to 24 and 34 pets. And it includes spa services, training, treats, calming solutions, and it will be located within the footprint of the existing PetSmart store. This is a map of the Greater Toronto area. The triangles represent existing PetSmart locations, and the highlighted yellow portions include locations that already have a pet hotel permitted. These are existing pet hotels already in operation, completely contained within the existing facility. In terms of locations of uses, we have places in Mississauga. We have a pet hotel in Mississauga, which is listed as a permitted use through the bylaw. In Ajax, it was permitted through a minor variance. In Etobicoke, it's a permitted use. In Richmond Hill, it was permitted through a zoning bylaw amendment. In Stony Creek, it was permitted through a minor variance. And in Scarborough, it was also permitted through a minor variance. Now I'm going to turn it over to Alan Blundell.
I'm actually Rob Smith.
Oh, sorry, Rob.
That's okay. Good evening, and I am a 22-year veteran of PetSmart Canada since we opened here, and have been operating across Canada, looking after the stores across Canada, including the 9 Pets hotels that we operate.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councillors. My name is Alan Blundell. I've been with PetSmart for just over 4 months, resident of Oakville for 27 years. Pleased to be with you this evening. We've got about half a dozen slides to take you through to give you a little bit more context on our proposal. Just to give you a little bit of background around the Pets Hotel, first introduced in 2002, PetSmart has opened 220 overnight and day camp facilities, 9 of which are in Canada, of which Oz took you through in terms of the greater Toronto area, making us the largest overnight and daycare provider for pets in North America. We do have a short 2-minute video that I think will give you a better understanding in terms of the context of what the experience looks like, both for our pets as well as our pet parents. And then I'll turn it back over to Rob, who's going to give you a little bit more of an understanding around what the experience looks like in terms of the day-to-day, coupled with our focus on safety.
Hi, I'm Bailey. My mom's going on vacation, and so am I. I'm staying at Pets Hotel at our local PetSmart store. My friend Coco is checking in from doggy day camp at the Curbside Ballet. Hey, Coco! I love my crew at Pets Hotel. They're safety certified and always have a local vet on call. Hi, Maria. Maria checks me out before I check in to make sure smell or hear us dogs, so everyone feels safe. I see little tags. That means first-time guests. You're in good hands, ladies. Here's my suite. Feels just like home. Dave, is it playtime yet? Is it? Mom signed me up for a package with doggy day camp. This is Cheyenne. She makes sure day camp is fun and safe. We exercise, make friends, play games, and ooh, bubbles! Bubblicious! If you're shy like Sophia, Cheyenne makes sure you're okay. Time for my meal. Maria's fixing my food from home, and Pets Hotel also serves complimentary meals. And Kylo is a dessert wizard. I'll have the ice cream sundae made just for dogs. My favorite. The best part of the day, spa time. Ashley sends me home clean, and Pets Hotel washes my bed too. Yeah, right beyond the ears. That's the spot. Don't you wish you were me right now? Hey Mom, in case I forget to tell you everything, PetSmart gave us this progress report to let you know I had a great time at Pets Hotel. Don't forget to mention how much I liked my treats. There you go. Can't wait to come back.
Great, so hopefully that gave you a good overview of what the Pets Hotel has to offer in our Canadian locations, our North American locations. As you'll see on this slide, we have several different standard rooms. We have suites that obviously the dog in the video is quite happy to see. We have kitty cottages. Both of those dog and cat areas are separated by ventilation so they can't sense each other, which is important to us so that we know dogs and cats are separated and have no contact with each other. They have all the comforts of home. So as you would have seen there, the pet parent brought their own dog bed to have with their dog. And then the meals are included as well, which we offer it multiple times through the day to make sure that the pets are kept on their regular schedule. Clean air purification is what I wanted to highlight a little bit on. It's pet therapy, my apologies. And this is where we really make sure that the ventilation is clean. There was a question earlier about smell or having issues with customers coming into the store and or the mall. That is separate ventilation whatsoever, so there'd be no indication of pets in the building. My apologies, my head here. Lastly, we wanted to talk a little bit about safety and the training aspect of our buildings. So every associate that's within our Pets Hotel is safety certified. They go through personal training with a manager in the building for 13 to 20 hours on top of their regular onboarding program to make sure that they're safety certified. We have 24-hour care in our buildings. There's someone in our buildings 24/7, 365 days a year to make sure that the pets are safe. There's an emergency vet on call at any given time in the event that there is an opportunity that we need a vet. The health monitoring system I spoke to with Pet Therapy, it's constantly monitoring the air through the buildings. We also have indoor boarding. This is a big deal for us because it makes sure that the pets don't go outside and it becomes an opportunity for it to, leave the building. So that is why we contain everything inside. You see the large playrooms, the dogs get lots of play. What you didn't hear is the kittens come out and play as well. It's a contained area, so we do bring them out to have some playtime as well. Thank you, and I believe, I'll show you a couple pictures, my apologies. Here's some pictures as well that build on the video. Great.
Thank you very much for your information. Are there questions for are there questions? I'll just start at the end and come this way. Councillor Sandu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. Your presentation was very informative. Just a couple of questions generally about the mall and your conversations with RioCan. Are you going to be allowing pets through the mall into your location as well?
It's an external entrance.
Okay, so there won't be an exit and entry in the mall itself?
Correct.
Okay, I think that answers a majority of my questions. Thank you very much.
Who's next? Councillor Pavin.
Okay. So my question actually is around the other locations that you have. Are any of your other locations situated in a mall or so close to residential subdivisions as Oakville places?
Several. So our Richmond Hill location is within a community. The Ottawa locations are near communities.
Okay.
Yeah, most of them.
This
quite
would be the
frankly.
first inside a shopping mall?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And who's next? Councillor Adams?
Thanks very much. Do any of your other locations have an outdoor run area?
None of the locations in North America.
None of the locations in North America, okay. And the zoning that you've got in some of your other locations, particularly your other mall locations that you've just described, what kind of zoning is attached to them with respect to the pet hotel element of it? Are they zonings that speak specifically to the location within the existing building or setbacks from?
The other uses, they vary. I can speak to a couple of them as I got a few of the approvals. Most of them were recognizing the existing retail store as a permitted use and then allowing the pet hotel as an accessory to the retail store, similar to how you would have a store and then it would have an accessory like a garden center. You're still allowed the store. This is just an accessory use to help complement the store. So there's no specific regulations in any of those examples that regulate the pet hotel being separated by a certain distance because they're all contained.
And none of them speak to the requirement that the pet hotel be indoor entirely, for example?
No, because they were either minor variance or site-specific, and it was to that application, and they were all internalized. So it was inherent with the application that they would all be internal.
Inherent in what way? Because of the drawings that you submitted at the time?
Correct, because they were tied to the application's drawings and the way that the application was structured.
So the approval that you received would have said the allowance for this use is granted,
Per these.
subject to it being completed in the way as per
The drawings.
the drawings that have been
Correct.
submitted or something. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Worship. Most of my questions were already asked, but I have a couple further clarifications. You haven't been in a shopping mall before. What about being on a multi-level building?
Yes.
You've been in that?
Yes.
Any
Oh,
issue?
for a Pets Hotel, I apologize. No. For pet stores, yes, not a Pets Hotel.
What is I know you've got noise mitigation measures for external to the building. What about internal? In terms of not driving the gym that's moving in next to you or any of the other facilities around there crazy with barking dogs?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure of the noise part. Other than it's contained internally, I'm not sure of the exact specs.
Okay, but do you have experience containing that internally? Is that something that is the case in other jurisdictions that you're?
We are adjacent to many other retailers, so I would,
I don't think we've ever had a complaint of those.
Right.
Yeah, we're adjacent to many. The ones that I spoke to earlier are all attached to other retailers.
Right.
Just not in a enclosed mall.
Okay. The Ontario Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals legislation talks about certain amounts of fresh air and daylight. How do you comply with that? Is it this, can you explain how that works and how you're able to comply with those
Yeah, I
legislation?
cannot explain that, to be honest with you, but we can certainly follow up on that.
Okay.
I would say, given the 9 we have today, I'm going to assume we're in compliance.
Well,
but
clearly you obviously can, or somebody
Yeah.
would have done something. I'm curious
Correct.
how that works. It'd be good if they can come back with the next report, because I know that some of the people that have contacted myself, and I imagine Councillor Grant as well, that your 2 ward councillors, that's one of the things that we're hearing is how can you keep the animals indoors, and is that really gonna last?
Yes.
Third thing is, so none of your facilities have, and you said you clarified in North America.
Correct.
Do you have outdoor facilities in other countries?
No, it's just we only operate Pets Hotels in US and Canada.
Okay, so then, for that case, then no PetSmart hotel
Correct.
anywhere in the world, okay.
Correct.
Because it's when you made that clarification, it sounded like maybe the UK, they were roaming free. Has there been any issue with that, any jurisdiction that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
And the customers are happy, the landlords are happy, the neighbors are happy?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Worship.
Council, the only other piece I will add, just in terms of the safety aspect relative to air purification and sunlight, we do have vets on staff as part of PetSmart that are associates with us, and certainly their guidance in terms of what's required with respect to taking care of the pets in our care.
Are the veterinarians on site, or are they
Not on site, but we do have on-site vets in our office in Phoenix that make sure that as we're obviously building out plans and making sure we're meeting specs, that they're giving us the guidance that's required to take care of them.
Some of those rooms look nicer than some of the hotel rooms I've stayed in, I just want you to know. Thank you, Worship.
Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. That was a great video. I was actually looking to book some time myself, but that's another story. Is your proposal contingent upon being able to do the overnight boarding? So if you're expecting to get a bylaw amendment as a result to allow you to do this overnight boarding, if you don't get that, would you still be opening up your site?
In terms of the retail space itself,
Correct.
we would. We'd still move forward.
So what percentage of the business would be the overnight stay?
It's a small percentage, I would say single digit. I mean, what we get from an attachment rate, given the loyalty base that you build, coupled with them shopping the core retail space, is really where we see the advantage.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Robertson. Obviously, pets are popular.
Thank you for your presentation. I just have a question, because I know you're on the second floor, and you said it's going to have its own entryway into it. So can you tell me where the stairs will be located to get to it? Because I know that all the stairs have been torn off now for the actual mall. Like, how safe is it getting cat carriers and dog beds and everything up and down stairs outside in the middle of winter in Oakville?
Yeah, I know it's ground level on that parking lot. So it's on the northeast side. Entrance.
It's grade.
Oh, it's on grade from that side to get into it? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chisholm.
In your business, have you ever experienced abandoned animals in your front door of your establishments or your operations? And
Yes.
How do you mitigate that? How do you help work
We
that out?
partner with the local SPCA or Humane Society.
So, okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you very much for your time and your information.
Great, thank you.
Are there any members of the public with information on this file for the consideration of council? I'll ask again and a third time, and I will ask council for I'll ask the planning director to list, are there any new issues to be added to this resolution beyond what Ms. Coburn already detailed?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to council. Concerns were expressed as to how noise can be mitigated. Noise has been an issue on the past in the site. How do we deal with the conflict between the requested zoning bylaw where the zoning bylaw has not applied for an outdoor space and the licensing bylaw requires access to an outside space? If outside space is provided, how could it be regulated and noise mitigated? And can you review the requirements of the Standards of Care Regulation 1609, I believe it was, and report back? This is the SPCA legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Planning Director. I need a councillor to move the recommendation with the additions mentioned by the Planning Director. Councillor Knoll, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Thank you, everybody. Our next item tonight is the discussion item. The number 2 is the update report on Oakville Green Development, Inc. And this is going to be led off with a presentation by our senior planner, Mr. Paul Barrett. Mr. Barrett? Madam Planning Commissioner?
Mayor and members of council, prior to Paul leading off on his presentation, I did want to provide you an update on a recent conversation we had with Industry Canada to get a better understanding of their approval process in the approval of radio stations. So as we understand from the discussion we had with them this afternoon, applications are submitted through the Industry Canada CRTC reviews them at the same time. There is a study that's provided to Industry Canada from a broadcast engineer that understands the issues around the station itself. So they issue a license if they're satisfied with the conclusions from that broadcast study. And then when the facility is built, they ascertain whether or not, through another study from the applicant, if the station meets all the requirements that it has in place. So in the case of the particular facility that has raised some concerns on the applications that you have tonight, the 2 applications, an assessment was done as recently as 2017, where they were looking at some modifications to their license. So that assessment, what it showed for them was that this facility is in compliance with all of the requirements from Industry Canada. That would include their frequency distribution pattern for how the radio signal is received. but it also includes their requirements to meet Safety Code 6. Code 6 is the requirement that Health Canada puts in place, and that requirement is met on the property itself. In fact, what the representative from Industry Canada told us, it's well within the property boundaries that it meets those requirements. So that study was done as recently as 2017. And just to give you some context, the Industry Canada representative identified 3 issues of impact that we need to be paying attention to as we evaluate these applications. One is the overload on radio equipment. So if you have a computer in your home, perhaps you would get some frequency out of that. And so in order to mitigate those concerns, it can range from anywhere from a warning clause in a subdivision up to actually a setback requirement. So there would be some considerations in the land use planning sphere to look at that scale of considerations. Secondly, if you're dealing with larger buildings that have longer pieces of metal, there may be an opportunity, particularly during construction, to have some a current transferred into those metal pieces, which would then impact anybody who's constructing. Those can be mitigated, but they're mitigated through the construction process, and the long-term issues can be mitigated through however the building itself is grounded, as we understand it from the discussion today. And the last, of course, is the impact on the frequency patterns for the radio station itself that a building has. So throughout the planning process, the town has been aware of the AM station in this location. So if we think of the properties or the approvals on West Oak Trails to the south of Dundas, it was taken into consideration during the secondary plan process. They did consider whether or not there were any requirements through the zoning process as well. And in fact, what ended up being the requirement was warning clauses in the subdivision agreement because they had assessed the issue to that extent. The issue on the north, this is the first time really staff have had an opportunity to understand or assess the impacts on taller buildings because this is a new component. As you're aware, everything south of Dundas is a 4-story height limit, and it's mostly wood construction, which means that there's very little opportunity for the transfer of that radio wave. So we have been dealing with this issue over some time. The only property north of Dundas that really has had an implication is the hospital, and they were dealt with through their mitigation of the construction itself. So at this point in time, we have the information from White Oaks Communication. Staff are recommending deferral of both the application that Paul will present as well as the 393 Dundas so that we have an opportunity to really understand what are the implications on these particular applications? Are there things that we need to build into our planning approvals as a land use authority? And with that peer review study, then we would also apply it to the health-oriented mixed-use node study that we're doing in the area itself, which is why we recommended for that study to be funded itself. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul, but I did want to give you that information from Industry Canada's recently as today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. A zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision application were submitted by Oakville Green Development, Inc., and the report can be found on page 5 to 118 of the agenda tonight. The subject lands are located east of the Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital and form part of a larger land holding by Oakville Green. The draft plan of subdivision proposes to divide the subject lands into 3 blocks, reshape the Glen Oak Stormwater Management Pond, which is owned by the town, and provide 1 new public road extending from the hospital entrance along 3rd Line through the site to William Halton Parkway. The zoning bylaw amendment proposes to permit 4 15-story buildings, inclusive of a hotel and conference center, medical office, retirement home, and an employment use building with ground floor retail and 2,344 underground parking spaces. Floor area proposed is approximately 1 million square feet. In addition, a future development block located at the southeast corner of 3rd Line and William Halton Parkway is proposed to be created and zoned to permit additional floor area. Since the statutory public meeting on February 11th of this year, the applicant revised their application, and I'd like to draw your attention to 3 changes. The first is the size of the Glen Oak Stormwater Management Pond is larger, and it's now based on an equal land exchange with the town. And there's more information on this on page 15 of the staff report. Secondly, the automated mechanical parking is no longer being pursued by the applicant at this time, and the parking plan has been revised to include 3 levels of underground parking. Thirdly, the applicant revised their job figures and provided rationalization of the parking plan, and the parking plan details are included as Appendix E in the staff report. As outlined in the staff report, a significant amount of progress has been made in reviewing the Oakville Green development applications, and subject to the modifications outlined in the staff report, the Oakville Green development is generally reflective of the future community vision of the North Oakville West Secondary Plan. In the fullness of time, the Oakville Green development would be supportive of planned bus rapid transit along Dundas Street, and the vision of the secondary plan includes replacement of the radio towers to the east with urban development. However, in the interim, there is no bus rapid transit along Dundas Street, and the radio towers to the east are in active operation. Accordingly, staff are recommending deferral of this application for the following 3 reasons, which were identified after the statutory public meeting. Firstly, submissions were made on March 14th and April 1st by White Oaks Communications Group, the owners of the radio station towers to the east. White Oaks raised concerns regarding the Oakville Green development application relating to 3 matters, which I understand you will hear more from White Oaks today. The first is interference with radio signals. The second is public health and safety, and that's during construction and post-construction. And the third is radio interference with construction equipment and consumer electronics. White Oaks submitted a number of reports and studies in support of their concerns, which included AM modeling and other studies prepared by a professional engineer. Staff is of the opinion that these concerns need to be better understood and that this advice should come from a qualified expert. Accordingly, staff are recommending that council approve funding for a town-initiated peer review of the White Oaks submission, and to also consider related matters which should be assessed in planning for the surrounding area. Secondly, there is a public interest in ensuring timely access to the hospital by emergency vehicles and the public. More work is needed on the TIS, the Transportation Impact Study, in the form of a sensitivity analysis to be able to provide a full assessment of the impact on the transportation system in and around the hospital. This sensitivity analysis would be focused on 2 main concerns which were identified by staff. Firstly, Oakville Green is projecting a higher level of employment, which is detailed in the table from the staff report outlined on the slide. Based on staff's analysis, it was found that on average, the higher density of employment proposed could result in 21% more trips than accounted for in the applicant's transportation impact study. Secondly, in absence of the Dundas BRT, the transportation impact study relies on the town to in part fund capital costs of buying additional buses triggered by the proposed development and fund the associated operating costs. These costs are currently not funded and would be subject to council approval through the annual budget process. If this level of transit is not provided, as assumed by the transportation impact study, then the transportation impact study would be underestimating the impact of the development on area roadways. And thirdly, a better understanding of the financial impact of the proposed development to the town is necessary for 2 reasons. Number 1, the level of employment projected by Oakville Green of 2,636 employees is higher than the 1,527 employees projected by the town's development charge study, as outlined in the staff report. This supports the current rates in the development charge bylaw. This could result in additional financial impact to the town not accounted for in the current development charges. Secondly, staff estimate that the new buses required to support the proposed development would cost approximately $7.2 million, less 18% funded by development charges, which is about 1.3 million, and it would cost approximately $4.4 million in gross annual operating costs to the town. While staff expect this financial impact would be reduced once factors such as fare box revenue and increased assessment value of the subject lands are taken into account, more information is needed to accurately assess what the financial impact to the town is and to be able to identify mitigation measures for council. Accordingly, staff are of the opinion that a scoped financial impact study is necessary. The staff report also provides an update on the technical review of the application, including matters raised by council. The related full technical comments are appended to the report as part of the public record. For these remaining matters, in staff's view, there are solutions, and the staff report provides the anticipated resolution of each of these remaining issues. In terms of the other matters raised by council at the statutory public meeting, I'd like to focus on how the issues of parking and land use have been advanced. In terms of parking, a range of between 2,433 parking spaces to 3,056 parking spaces would be required for the proposed development, and the estimated number of employees would fall right in this range. Since the zoning bylaw amendment applies south of Dundas Street is supported by a more recent technical paper regarding parking and loading standards, and that's from 2013. For comparison purposes, staff calculated the minimum parking required if the proposed development was located south of Dundas Street within a growth area such as Uptown. In that scenario, a minimum of 2,407 parking spaces would be required, which is similar to the minimum parking requirement for the proposed employment uses outlined in this table north of Dundas Street. However, given the higher density of employment proposed and the conceptual nature of the plans, staff anticipate that as part of a holding provision, the maximum parking ratio in the North Oakville bylaw would be required unless the applicant can demonstrate through parking justification study to the satisfaction of the town that a lower rate could be justified. And finally, in terms of land use, the applicant is proposing to rezone the subject lands to a site-specific health, science, and technology core zone, and is seeking permissions for a broad range of land uses, which staff are supportive of in principle in terms of permitting a broad range of employment land uses on the subject lands. However, there are concerns with allowing dwelling units in an employment area, not limiting retail use, and the appropriateness of certain land uses being proposed within the context of the health-oriented mixed-use node. Furthermore, staff are concerned with the applicant's approach of pre-zoning the future development block, which is highlighted on the slide, without adequate analysis in the supporting studies. For instance, this would permit approximately 430,000 square feet of GFA on the future development block beyond the 1 million square feet proposed without analysis in the transportation impact study. As outlined in more detail in the staff report, staff are of the opinion that these concerns could be addressed by maintaining the existing development zone on the future development block, which is consistent with the supporting studies, and prohibiting dwelling units in the retirement home, providing limits on retail land uses, which are consistent with the growth plan, and scoping the range of permitted land uses, which would be appropriate for the health-oriented mixed-use node and would also be supportive of the health-oriented mixed-use node. So in conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for Council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the report. Questions? Councillor Elgar?
Thank you very much for the detailed report. I think you covered everything. My question is, if you roll back to September 2015, when they put the proposal together for everything, and it was going to be 3 primary jobs for every secondary job or residential, Is there any can staff make any correlation from what we had then? We were doing original official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, and a development plan. Is staff trying to piece it all together now to see how it compares with this new application that was instead of the one from September of 2015?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is a different development application in the sense that there is no official plan amendment required, and there is no regional official plan amendment required either. And there is no residential land uses being proposed. The 3-to-1 land ratio was, it was a way of permitting the residential at that point in time, and linking it to the amount of jobs to ensure that there was a primacy of employment on the site while also allowing a mix of land uses. But because there isn't that same mix of land uses being proposed through the current application, that 3-to-1 ratio doesn't apply.
Good answer with that one, the current application. But as you pointed out, there's another piece of land that they still own, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. This is part of a larger land holding by Oakville Green.
So for traffic studies, we approved this one without knowing, like at one point we were over 10,000 jobs here. As I believe that's what, something like 10 to 12. I heard on last week it might have been 12, but now what is it, 2,637 employees. So if we got another 8,000 people, or 11,000, 8, 9, 10,000 people coming into that other section, is that what could happen?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't have details of the rest of the land holdings owned by Oakville Green. What's before council tonight is phase 1 of that development.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a small portion, I guess. If 2,600 and we're going to 12,000, it's a very small portion, isn't it?
It would be, through you, Mr. Mayor, it would be a portion of the development, and in due course, as additional rezoning or official plan amendment applications and plan of subdivision applications are submitted, it would be put through rigorous technical review as the current application. So the transportation impact, functional servicing, it would be reviewed through a development application.
Okay. Now, the sizing of the stormwater management pond, does it take into consideration the other portion that isn't part of this application?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the current size of the pond, it'll be maintained through the reconfiguration of the pond. So the actual size of the pond wouldn't change, and it does take into account the additional development block.
So it has already taken that into account for that portion?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. In addition, lands to the north, including the district energy lands.
Okay, so we must know what portion is going to be hardened at least by this, based on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are assumptions that are used for urban development in terms of the impervious area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do know that. Okay, well, thank you very much. I look forward to all the other information we're going to collect over whatever period of time it takes. Thank you.
Any other questions? Are the, Councillor Palmer?
My question, thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. My question is around the Dundas Street Bus Rapid project. This isn't the first time I've seen that mentioned in our reports, but I've never seemed to see a timeline tied around that. So I'm just wondering, do we have an idea of the timeline? And then there's also, assuming it's funded by the province, so do we have any information on that? How much would be funded by the province? And my last question is the sensitivity analysis. We always have this back and forth conversation about how much are the bus systems used in Oakville, and if we do implement a rapid bus system, is it going to be utilized? And will our sensitivity analysis include that before we make any of those decisions? Thank you.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the BRT for Long Dundas is actually identified in the Metrolinx transportation plan. Metrolinx at this point in time is going through the process of determining the priority projects, so they have set no timing to them, nor has the funding for those projects actually been resolved. So at this point in time, it is a long-term plan intent, but timing and funding are still outstanding. think I'll leave the second part of the question to Paul.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the transportation impact study submitted by the applicant proposes a modal split of 10%. So that's the proportion of transit riders in 2021, 15% in 2026, and 20% in 2031. So what the sensitivity analysis would do, it would provide a scenario where if those additional buses are not provided and the ridership levels stay the same, then what would the impact be on the transportation infrastructure in the area? That's what we want to look at.
Thank you, Councillor. Any others? Councillor Auger?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So the clarification, so 2021, overall, it's going to be 15%. 10 is going to be transit, and there's another 5%, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is an additional 5%, but it's not allocated to transit. That's active transportation, so that's residents that would bike to work or walk to work.
Yeah, like, that's the plan.
Yeah.
What is the transit, currently, what do we have? What is our transit ratio? Like, when I mean, not the cars or anything going down to the GO train, but what's the current rate for our Oakville transit?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the overall rate is 6%, but that would include the GO Transit component.
I know.
And I think the most recent calculation was around 3 or 4% for local transit itself.
3 to 4%.
Yeah.
And we're talking an awful lot more then, rolling forward to 20, even 2026 is going to be 15. We're going to go from 3 or 4 to 15. That's the plan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that's why we're asking for the sensitivity analysis to really understand if that didn't come about, then what is the implication on the transportation network and how could that be resolved so that we have, we've covered off the worst case scenarios.
And I thank you, and I thank staff for putting all these things in. I think you're an excellent report. Thanks.
Madam Clerk, are there delegations?
We have 2 listed delegations. The first delegation is Constantine Stravagas from O'Connor-McLeod-Hanna.
Welcome, Mr. Stavrikas. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe we have a slide presentation. Oh, do I?
I can help you out here.
Okay. Let me see. There we go.
All you have to do is hit the arrow to go down to the next slide, okay?
Great, thank you very much. So my name is Constantine Stavrakos. I represent White Oaks Communications Group Limited, and we'd like to thank the mayor and council for having us here today. White Oaks operates 2 radio stations, CJYE 1250 and CJMR 1320, from its home at 1303 Dundas Street West. It's been operating in the town since 1956, and that's its second home. Originally, it was a little further away. Currently has 6 186-foot tall radio telecommunication towers which transmit 10,000 watts of energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's federally licensed and regulated under Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. So AM radio and development pose 2-way impacts, and you've heard of a few of those impacts earlier. So AM radio transition sites can adversely be impacted by mid-rise and high-rise development, compromising their long-term viability. They can also impact those developments from construction right through to occupation unless properly mitigated. One of the main culprits is something called re-radiation. Basically, long metal objects get co-opted by the radio towers and get electrically charged by the RF frequencies that are emitted by the towers. The result is that this distorts and disrupts the AM radio station's patterns. It can cause contact burns and electric shocks, and there's secondary accidents that can occur because of that. And it can also disrupt electronic equipment, so both consumer electronics, but also construction equipment, such as the operations of cranes. So White Oaks retained Lawrence Bear Associates, Inc., an electrical engineer company, to conduct modeling of the Health Sciences and Technology District. It's approximately 6.6 kilometers from the transmission site. And they identified 3 kinds of potential impacts. Serious threat to the construction workers and post-construction residents, including contacts burns, shocks, and increased risk of catastrophic accidents. Disruption and distortion of the radio signals, which can cause them to be outside their license parameters, but can also potentially interfere with other radio stations. And finally, interference with construction equipment and consumer electronics, leading them to malfunction, fail, or cause catastrophic failures. I'm going to skip past that part right now. Now, there are potential solutions. It starts with doing detailed modeling of the construction phase and post-construction operations based on detailed design and construction work plans. From there, a mitigation plan can be developed and designed, including doing an initial mitigation design, having an RF engineer available on site during construction to adapt mitigation, ongoing monitoring through the construction phase, emergency response plans, post-construction availability of an RF engineer, and periodic monitoring thereafter, as well as, if necessary, warning clauses. This is a menu of items. It's not necessarily every single item would be involved. At this stage, it's really too early to say what mitigation would look like, because we only have, at best, a conceptual plan of these buildings. So that's the end of the details of this, and I'm really here for any questions that council may have with respect to our submissions. We're early in the process, and what our ask here is to actually do further work, do further studying before approving these developments. And I understand that's also staff's recommendation, so we're very pleased with that recommendation at this time.
Any other questions? Councillor Giddings.
Thank you very much. Could you go back one slide there? I believe it's one. Yeah, the bottom sentence, if necessary, warning clauses to warn purchasers of potential risks. If necessary, could you explain that?
So let's say that detailed modeling is conducted and the monitoring, and the ultimate determination is that with all the mitigation that's being implemented, it's highly unlikely that there'll be any additional effects and that purchasers will have any issues. Then it seems to be probably unnecessary to do a warning clause. On the other hand, if for taking consumer electronics as an example, if we're still at risk of malfunctioning radios, malfunctioning computers, or et cetera, then a warning clause may be appropriate. It really depends on what the ultimate results of the studies and mitigation are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Lischina.
Thank you for that information. You indicated that it was moved in the past. These radio towers were moved, I believe they were in the Glen Abbey area.
They were.
Is there ever thought of moving them again?
It's not something that White Oaks would rule out, but it's challenging in that it needs to find a site that doesn't have the same issues, that within a limited geographic area. And it's a multi-year process to move these towers. It's usually approximately 2 years, but that's not necessarily written in stone. Ultimately, the new site and the new pattern would have to be approved by the federal government.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time and your information.
Thank you.
Any other delegations?
The last listed delegation is Eldon Theodore from Oakville Green Developments, Inc.
Mr. Theodore, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, members of council, for the opportunity to speak today. Here on behalf of Oakville Green Developments, Inc., and I will note that the owners, Dr. Joseph Dablé, is here tonight, as well as his son, Tony Dablé. This is a very important project for my clients. They have been actively trying to develop this innovation district since the original applications were made in 2016. We've started, we've stopped, we've started anew with the effort to try and realize this health sciences and technology district that's been contemplated as part of this overall area. In my opinion and in my experience, it's rare to find a landowner or a developer who choose to push the envelope on creativity, innovation, and who is actively seeking to leave a landmark development and built form legacy within the town itself. The vision for this project is founded on a number of great principles, including high-quality employment generation in technology, information sciences, and the medical sector itself. It's intended to be a mixed-use hub that can attract high-quality talent to the town and to serve as an incubator for further innovation and world-class companies to move to North Oakville West. It also provides a multimodal movement option, and it will be transit-ready when those future infrastructure opportunities emerge. It is an ambitious undertaking that comes with a high level of risk and cost, particularly on the owner's end. And it requires a level of personal courage and conviction to take this to the finish line. My client is, in no doubt, absolutely disappointed with planning's recommendation of deferral in the recommendation report. We're also disappointed that staff have not provided council with subdivision draft approval conditions or a draft bylaw to consider should council decide to make an alternative decision on the matter. We obviously, and since the beginning of this application, want to work with town staff to help them answer all the questions that they need in order to bring forward a positive recommendation report. In particular, we've already engaged a number of specialists to advise on the White Oak submission that has been made today, and we plan to provide responses to what we believe at this point and what we have evaluated are a number of inaccuracies and overstatements on the potential impacts with respect to this development. We're also looking forward to meeting with staff to address the remaining items, I believe item number 2 and item number 3, with respect to the TIS, and hope to bring a resolution on that matter as well. If it is council's decision to agree to this deferral, we will accept that decision, but with a caveat. We would humbly ask, that council require a report be brought back to the earliest available council meeting, ideally May 13th, with a final recommendation. We, on our end, in our consulting team, are prepared to work backwards, bend over backwards, and work hard to help town staff get the appropriate answers they need to assist in that endeavor. However, my client cannot afford any further delays on this project. Should the recommendation not be brought back to council in a timely manner or in a timely fashion, my client may be poised to walk away from this project. We ask that this council assist with expediting the report's return so that we can see this unique opportunity come to fruition. And I'm happy to answer any questions this council may have.
Any questions for Mr. Theodore? Thank you, sir. Councillor Elgar?
So just to be clear, you have read the reports that were sent from the Lawrence Barr and Associates?
I have read, through you, Mr. Mayor, to you, Councillor Elgar, I have read the original submission and the subsequent submission.
Right.
I'm fully aware of the issues. We've reviewed it with some of our specialists on our end, and we've reviewed it at an initial level with engineers specialized in this field, and we have a high level of confidence that the issues raised can be addressed.
No, I thank you for that. Just the report, you yourself wouldn't want to approve something if in fact there could be a problem with heart pacemakers or anything like that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to you, Councillor Elgar, in agreement, but also with a measured sense of pause on the accuracy of the information, and that's why we're looking into it ourselves as well.
No, I think that's good. Everybody can look into it and come back with a good end result. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Theodore. Oh, Councillor Lischino?
Just a quick follow-up question with respect to the phases. So you've got the 3, and then that piece of land that's at the very top there. So when would the timing of that be, if, considering we're having these issues about traffic and all of that? So when would you think that would be coming?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to you, Councillor, that third piece, that block 3 that we've identified, or whichever block number, that piece was only put in there to round out the subdivision. Otherwise, it would have been an isolated parcel in itself. We had no intention of developing that parcel as part of the first phase, but we thought it would be prudent to extend the zoning to include that parcel and have language within the zoning itself or within the holding provision that would say that this would not develop as part of that phase. So it was never intended to be developed within this generation of the application, and we don't know when the next phase will proceed. It depends on the success of the first phase.
But it's still going to be the same road, it's still going to be the same neighborhood. I mean, you're giving us numbers based on what you have in that first section of it, but, you know, we're not gonna have an extra road there for the next part, so I'm surprised that it's not included, or more detail of it.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, the only reason why it's there is because it's a bit of a holdout parcel when you look at the design of the subdivision. It's not intended to be developed on, it's not intended to be used as part of this phase, but because it has frontage on William Halton Parkway and Third Line, by creating the blocks that we're creating, it inevitably forces us to consider what this piece is and what it could become. We had already recommended to staff that we had no issue with it being pulled out of the zoning, but obviously that didn't make it forward in the staff recommendation report or the staff information report. We have no issue that it's removed as part of the zoning. We don't intend on developing as part of this phase. It's not included as part of the traffic study. It's never intended to be.
All right, thank you, Mr. Theodore, for your information and your time.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Farmer.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about, actually for staff as well, just on the timing of the review. So I understand you've engaged an engineer and you've done an initial review of the submissions that we've received from White Oaks. When will your review be complete? And just if we can get an idea from staff on where we are in engaging a specialist and when council can expect to see any reports back on that.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to you, Councillor, we're anticipating a response back within the next 2 weeks.
Through your worship to the councillor, we have spoken to Industry Canada as recently this afternoon. They're going to provide us a list, but not a recommendation on people we may engage. We do understand through our investigations over the last 3 weeks, this is a very rare type of skill set. There's not many of them around that aren't either engaged on this project already with the owners of the radio station, and we're still actively looking for somebody. It is our intention to get the information back as soon as we're able to engage the consultant.
Councillor Lischino.
So, Mr. Simeone, is May 13th a doable date, as the applicant's asking?
Through your worship, in my opinion, no. We would not have a chance to even tender the document in that time frame, and we're also recommending deferral for 2 other reasons. That other work would still have to be completed in that time frame from our standpoint for you to have the right information to make a decision on this.
Thank you, Mr. Theodore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of council.
Madam Clerk, are there other delegations? No. Are there other members of the public with information for council on this file? All right, council, it's time for a decision. Is there a mover for the staff recommendation? Councillor Elgar, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. The next item before us, council, is the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy Phase 2 for Garlock Gardens. And you have the report from the Planning Services Department. And our heritage planner, Susan Shepherd, is available for a presentation if required. Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
I'd be pleased to move this item if my council colleagues are so inclined.
Absolutely. The item is duly moved. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you for being here, Ms. Shepherd. And you obviously wrote so good a report, you didn't need to present on it. All right. I would like to call your attention now to item number 4, where, once again, we have an opportunity to hear from our heritage planner, Ms. Susan Shappert, at 337 Douglas Avenue concerning a relocation and rehabilitation. Councillor Giddings. Let's see if mine works. Number 5, the supplementary information report and zoning bylaw amendment for 393 Dundas. This is the other property, if I understand it correctly, caught by the White Oaks information. And if you give your attention to Melissa Dalrymple, our planner, do you have anything to add to what we have, or do you recommend that we, I mean, I believe council is in a position where it's bound to defer this one too, after what it did on the other one. Is that, would you agree?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have the details in the staff report to go over in the presentation, but nothing additional has been raised since that authoring of the report.
Council, what do you want to do? I'll move it. Councillor Elder has moved it. Councillor Sanju has raised her hand.
I just have a comment before we go ahead. No issues with moving and going forward. Just a comment to the developers that are here. Councilor Parmar and I, and I'm sure she will also kind of echo the words that I'm about to say. We appreciate the fact that Mr. Korziak and his group have put so much time and attention into the questions and concerns that we had with regard to parking. But again, also have to defer to staff's recommendation. Thank you very much.
Councillor Parmar.
I just had a question for staff, actually, just for the clarity for the other councillors as well. I understand this is the zoning bylaw amendment application, so I just wonder, I know we're past the 120-day mark where the applicant could take this to the next level and appeal it. My question is, why can't we separate these items so that this the submission that we received from White Oaks could be dealt with later at site plan per se, and approve the stage that we're at? And just as a new councillor too, I just want some clarification on that matter.
Thank you, through your worship, to the councillor. So we've had discussions with the applicant about that, and in the previous submission you heard some recommendation about subdivision conditions. One of the concerns we have is we simply don't know enough about what the outcomes of the peer review and the subsequent study will be. If we move it to site plan and the building is too tall, which is what the zoning bylaw controls, or it's in a location that disagrees with the solution that arrives at from an engineering standpoint, they may have no zoning that's useful to them at that point in time, because zoning controls not only height, but setbacks at upper stories, and so on. These matters really aren't controllable by site plan. They're a function of the zoning bylaw. So this approach would be consistent with what the town did in 1993 with White Oaks, I believe it was, where they looked at the policy framework and said, we'd like to achieve that in the fullness of time, but we will wait for zoning to deal with the details when they come forward. This is no different. We're relying on a more detailed analysis to inform what heights and locations may or may not be in play with respect to this proposal.
All right. I understand, Madam Clerk, that we have at least one delegation.
Yes, Constantine Stravagas from O'Connor McLeod Hanna.
Mr. Stavrakis, do you have anything new for us? Thank you. Any other delegations? Are there other members of the public with information for council on this matter? All right, yes, ma'am. Would you come forward and identify yourself?
Good evening. My name is Dr. Michelle Matern. I'm the Development Manager for District Developments for the 393 development. And I'm not sure if I'm out of order, Mr. Mayor, but I would like to ask with reference to Councillor Parmar's question about separating these from zoning and site plan. 407 Dundas, the building right next door to it, which is 100 meters closer to the radio station, along with an 8-story building at Niagawa and Dundas, both are zoned for 8 and 10 stories. So if this is not a situation, what are we going to do on the already zoned buildings that have no right of appeal because we're past the appeal period on those buildings versus 393, which is further away, when the evidence and discussions that White Oaks Communication were providing said that most of the issues could be dealt with during construction and mitigation. So what is the difference between 393 Dundas in this situation and 407 Dundas, which has already received zoning for 10 stories?
Thank you for your question. Anything else?
Only if there are any other questions for the
Any other
councilors for
questions
me.
for the delegation? Thank you, Dr. Matter.
Thank you.
All right, it's moved, and may I put the vote? All those in favor? Any against? That's carried. So, Council, we now have the Economic Development 2018 Annual Report with a presentation from Amanda St. John, our Senior Economic Development Officer, if required. Councillor Parmar.
I mean, I'd like the answer to that question from staff, please.
I think you're going to get the answer to that in the subsequent report, but Mr. Planning Director, do you want to start out on an answer now?
Thank you, and through your worship to the councillors. My understanding is the question is how come 407 is approved and this one isn't? During the review of 407, council never received, nor did staff, any letters or reports similar to the ones that we shared with you tonight by way of appendix.
Oh, yeah, yes, I understand that
was
part.
not known to us. Now we're in a situation where there only is a site plan to deal with that.
Right.
We will be notifying, I made them personally aware of it on Friday in a personal meeting we held, but we'll be sending correspondence to them advising of this concern in the neighborhood and to take actions accordingly.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to clarify, if there was correspondence between the town and the client on 407 and that they have been made aware. Thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to finding out, well, never mind. There's a couple of missed steps here, it seems to me, in the progress of this issue, so it's going to be interesting to see that accounted for. But we're now at the Economic Development 2018 Annual Report, and Amanda St. John is standing by if you desire more. I mean, she has a presentation based on the report you read. What is your pleasure, Council? Councillor Chisholm?
I have a question with regard to the report.
I think you should ask it.
Thank you, Worship. Reading the report with respect to the economic development, there was a paragraph in there with respect to that we are not receiving applications in more of a, I guess, a customer-focused way, but rather more of a, I guess, a hold hand and tighten up as much as we can with respect to development happening for our commercial businesses. Let me just, if you give me a second to refer to it, because I thought we were going to have the report full, but I want to go through that one. If you just bear with me. It's basically talking about reducing red tape for our businesses. And one thing that did come up as discussion with the chamber and also with discussions with business owners, that when it comes to applications for development or building, they're in the same laneway as residential applications. Is that true?
That's the commissioner who'd have to.
Yeah, the commissioner, planning commissioner. Commissioner, thank you.
Perhaps I could answer that
Yes,
question.
thank you.
They are in the same pathway as residential applications. We are undertaking an overall review of all our development processes because an application such as the picture that you see on the screen would have been subject to a site plan review, and then it would have been subject to a building permit review. And so we're looking at the full extent of those processes in order to move them into a more of an online format, much more simplified review. Pieces that we've done already is for tenant fit out, and I think this was part of the budget presentation. For tenant fit out, when a tenant is moving into a new building, they usually need to fit it out to accommodate their particular use. We have looked at that already, and we've dropped the time period down from, I think the numbers are in order, from 30 days, which it was taking it previously, down to around 15. So in half, we've dropped that time frame already, just looking at that piece of the process. We'll continue on with the same review on all of the other processes through building permit and site plan.
Would there be consideration with respect to separating out commercial and manufacturing development outside of residential and have its own stream?
That is an option we're looking at. Definitely an option we're looking at. We're looking at the way in which to take it through the review processes with all of the disciplines through building permits. So there's several options we're considering on how we can streamline those processes and tighten them up.
Okay, thank you, because that seemed to be in the report. The development approval process was the most important aspect, frequently cited by our, I guess, our businesses and so forth. Anyways, thank you very much.
Councillor O'Meara, were you? Nope. Councillor Adams, yes?
I have one question, and then, well, maybe not everybody wants to see it. I think we should see the presentation because there's so many good things to be said.
Well,
But
Councillor,
I'm happy to ask my question first.
you're free to, go ahead, ask your question.
My question is, on page 194 and 195 in the appendices, we've got competitive positioning, and maybe you've got something in your slide deck about that, I'm not sure. But my question is, do we have figures around the tax per square foot for our industrial space and our commercial space? So we've got tax rate comparison information, and we've got development charge comparison information, and we've got land price comparison. But do we actually have how many dollars per square foot or cents per square foot, whatever it is, that's being paid?
Through you, Mayor Burton, we can do a calculation. We didn't do a test calculation for this report. We just right now benchmark sort of against the percentages.
Yeah.
But that's something we can definitely put together for council.
I'd be very interested to see that if
Okay.
that's something
Yeah.
that's possible to be done. And do you have a song and dance show that you could show our citizenry about how many great things you've done?
Yes, so actually, it's in my presentation as well, but I can just mention, we did put together within our department an economic update booklet that summarizes all of the information that's in the annual report. And just to clarify as well, through you, Mayor Burton, the question that you had about development approvals will be addressed more in the economic development strategy. This is more of the update from 2018, which is the foundation for what's happened last year. So all of the good news stories are in this brochure, and it's available tonight and online as well.
And all of the future is in the next report, item 7
Yes.
on the agenda.
That's correct.
So, so council, let me see if I can get a motion for the staff recommendation, which is to receive this report. Councillor Lischina, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. We appreciate you giving us such a good report. Now, your economic development strategy, I understood that we had a registered delegation on this, but I'm not seeing one. There is a presentation available from Dorothy St. George, and of necessity, the presentation is a synopsis of the detailed report that you've all read. I would just point out that we're beginning the consultation stage of this, so you're seeing stage 1 of what will then come back to us after public consultation. And I take it that you all would like to see the presentation to remind you of what's in the report you read. Am I right?
Sorry, Your Worship, I've read the report, very, very beneficial in terms of outlining the strategy. I'm more than happy to move it.
Thank you. Councillor Giddings.
I concur with Councillor Dudek. I just want to point out We received the media release earlier today, and the president of the Oakville Chamber of Commerce, as well as the chair, had some glowing words, so I think we're certainly on the right track.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Dorothy St. George, the Director of Development Engineering, we thank you for being ready and for having led such a great economic development strategy for the last, I forget how many years. And we're, based on the laudatory praise that you've already drawn from the Chamber at the start of it, we look forward to a good consultation with the public.
Thank you, Mayor Burton.
Thank you. It's moved, Council. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Council, I'm not aware of any confidential discussion items. You do have the advisory committee minutes from the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee meeting of March 26th, and we have, we need a motion that the following recommendation pertaining to item 6C of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee minutes from its meeting on March 26th be approved, and the remainder of the minutes be received. And I need a mover for this. And you have competing hands. I'm going with Councillor Giddings. Thank you, Councillor Giddings. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Now, I wonder if I could ask you for a motion to rise and report to Council. Councillor Duddick, all in favor? Thank you. That carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on confidential consent item C1, public hearing item 1, and discussion items 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and advisory committee minutes item 8. Is there a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Sandu and Councillor Knoll. All those in favor? Thank you. That carries. And Council, is there any new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature? Would anybody like to join me in wishing the Blades well in their game tomorrow night in the Buckland Cup? Councillor O'Meara, do you have something?
Yes, Your Worship. I didn't want to step on any toes. I'm wondering if you were going to bring up our former councillor, Michael Lansdowne, who passed away.
I think it would be appropriate for you, since you've inherited his seat, so you go right ahead.
Thank you very much. It is with sad news that we were notified about the passing of our former region and town councillor for Ward 1, Mike Lansdowne, who was a strong advocate and voice even after his time here at this council. And he always was very involved in the BVRA and continued to call me up on a frequent basis with many suggestions on numerous aspects going on. He will be missed in the community. He will be missed here. And at least on behalf of myself and council, I know we're wishing his family all of our condolences for his passing. And thank you for the time, Your Worship.
That was very well done, Councillor. Thank you very much on behalf of all of us. Anyone else? How about a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws? Councillor Longo and Councillor Robertson. All those in favor? And the bylaws are carried. And that completes our work together tonight. I hope the Leafs do well. The game has started. And I hear they're winning, so we're adjourned on a happy note.